Welcome, this is Jim, host of the Faith Influencer podcast, where we're going to dive into discussions on faith's role in everyday life, from navigating blended families to overcoming challenges. I'm a husband, a father, a Bible teacher, an advocate for applying faith to everyday life. So tune in as I share personal stories, valuable insights, and practical wisdom. So your ex lacks parenting skills. You almost dread that your children have to go to their house because they're immature or because they do things that you don't approve of. Maybe they have too much alcohol sitting around the house. Maybe it's the friends they allow to come over that you are afraid influencing your children. Maybe they say things like I had a parent say to me that their child's dad would say things that were derogatory. And she gave me an example. He was trying to play soccer and he would say to his son when he went over to his house, he'd say, "Son, you are so slow." Those kinds of things, you cringe when your child goes to their other biological parents. So how do you deal with that? What do you do when the other biological parent is a bad influence? That's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome. This is Jim Cunningham. You're a Faith Influencer. So let's get started and maybe help you in these areas. One of my greatest motivations as a step parent and as a parent is that I'm in a position that I can provide stability, examples where I can lay a foundation of health and consistency and provide a household where my children and my stepchildren can flourish. That's what you want to do as well, I know. But at the same time, your children aren't just around you. They have to go to the other biological parent. And so you're wondering what to do in those positions. I'm going to say to you that you're in a position like I am where you can have a profound impact. And I'm going to encourage you and say this. Do you realize that you can even overcome the bad influence that the ex provides when that child is in their household? You can overcome that. Now, let me just say personally that I'm in a similar position. I'm in a position where my stepchildren have an influence with their biological father that I 100% disapprove of. I'm talking about morally. I'm talking about lifestyle. I'm talking about what is allowed to go on. I 100% disapprove of what is allowed in the other household. But guess what? There's nothing I can do about that household. I can't go over there. I can't say to the other biological parent of my stepchildren, don't do this or do that. I have no influence over there. I can't do anything. So I'm in a position where I've got to try to overcome some of that when everyone is under my roof in my household. And you're in that same position. But there are things that you can do. Never underestimate the power of example. I'm so grateful for this, but the power of example oftentimes is underestimated so that you don't realize that you're influencing your kids to a greater extent because you're providing an example. Now, let me just throw this in. Because of the power of example, I realize that I want to lead my family in a certain way, not just my children, but my stepchildren. So I am 100% responsible for my choices as a leader, for my choices as an example. I am responsible for that. And so I've determined that I'm going to be the greatest factor in their life, far more than any outside, even their other biological parent. I'm going to be the greatest factor of influence in their life. That's what I've determined. So let's take that foundation and build on it. What do you do when your ex is a bad influence? Number one, I'm going to suggest to you that when they're in your household, this is one of the greatest things that statistics have shown us, and just in the realm of psychology has shown us, that if you create stability, that overcomes the instability in the other household. But here's how you do that. You create stability by providing certain rituals in their lives. Now, do you realize that children love rituals? Children love routine. You may not like routine as much, but they do. They like the idea that at certain times they can count on the fact that this is going to happen. I grew up in a household that was full of routines and remember, this was a long time ago, but there was not a day that passed that I can remember that we didn't sit around the table at 5 o'clock. It was a different day. I realize that, different era, but we sat around the table at 5 o'clock and we all had dinner together every single day. That was a routine. And then we had another routine. We had a routine that every Sunday morning we'd go to church, but every Sunday morning after that, we'd come home and we'd have a huge Sunday breakfast. That was a routine. Those kinds of things provide such stability for your children and your stepchildren. So I want you to think about some of the routines that you can put in place. Maybe you have a bedtime routine. I doubt they have a bedtime routine at the other house, but have one at your house. We used to do one with my daughters when they were little. We had a little poodle, and we would take the poodle up and they would jump in the bed together and giggle, and the poodle would bark as I would try to get them. It was a routine that we did every night, and they loved it. But those kind of routines provided a household that was overcoming the lack of routine and the bad influence in the other household. So I'm going to encourage you to install these routines. Now I want to throw another word at you, and I don't want you to pull back from this word, and it's the idea of boundaries. I've talked about this in a previous podcast, so I'm not going to dig into it much, but the same idea of routines and rituals is the idea of boundaries. You may not think that your children want boundaries, but they do. They're begging you for boundaries. They're begging you so that they know when they step out of line. So put those boundaries into place. Now, you can do nothing about the boundaries in the other household. I'm going to give you another example because this example was given to me by someone. They hate the fact that their child goes to the other parent's household, and that parent, this is their terminology, okay? And that parent is a slob. That's what they say. They go over there and they throw everything in the floor. They're slobs. There are things everywhere, and they come home and they want to do that. Well, let's talk about that just for a second about boundaries. You cannot do anything about the boundaries over there. By the way, can I just throw this in and not make a big deal about it? If you have an ex who is a slob, as I've just described, that doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad parent. Doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad parent. Maybe in that one particular area, they don't have any boundaries. So don't sweat that going on in the other household. There's some things that aren't a parenting issue. It's just a personality issue you're not going to sweat. That might be one of them. But you can't set the rules for that household. But in saying that, do not hesitate to set the boundaries in your household. You have convictions. Stand up for those convictions. You want boundaries in your household. Do that. You don't want your children throwing things on the floor in your household. Don't allow it to happen. You set the boundaries for your household. Okay, so did you get the first point? The first thing is, if you want to overcome that bad influence, then you create the good influence. You create the bedtime routines. You create the rituals. You create the stability. You put the boundaries into place. That's the first thing you do. Then here's the next thing. You build their self-esteem. You build their self-esteem. Find things that they're good at. I'm going to give you an example. So my son was not athletic at all. Not athletic. Well, I grew up in an athletic household. My brother and I both went to college on athletic scholarships. So he's not athletic at all. So he tried to play basketball and he sat on the bench the whole season. Not good for his self-esteem. So what do? So we looked looking for something that he was good at. So he took up the drums. He was good at the drums, but he got bored with it. He started playing the saxophone, got really bored with that. But then he came across something that changed his life. And I mean everything. Boxing, of all things, boxing. He now goes to the gym. He's 13 now, but he goes to the gym and 3 times a week, and he's involved in a boxing class. It's changed him physically. He was a little chubby. Now he is built solid. It's changed his self-esteem. His confidence has skyrocketed. Everything has changed because we looked and looked and looked until we found something that he was good at. So I'm going to encourage you that build their self-esteem. It's important in parenting in general, but it's really important when you have stepchildren because that whole process of going through a divorce and a breakup and all of that hurts their self-esteem. So find something they're good at, find something you can encourage them at, and begin to build their self-esteem. That's huge. So move on. Let me give you the next one. Now, this comes from the Old Testament. There was this situation in the Old Testament where, and it wasn't a step parent or a stepchild, but it's a principle in the Old Testament that I'm going to ask you to implement in your blended family. Here was the principle. There was these two characters in the Old Testament, and the guy's name was Hosea. He was an Old Testament prophet, and he had a wife, and her name was Gomer. Weird name, I know, for a woman, but I guess maybe not then. Her name was Gomer. Well, Gomer went astray in her life. She just went astray. You can go look it up in the book of Hosea in the Old Testament, read about it, but she went astray in her life. So you know what Hosea did? Hosea didn't write her off. Hosea didn't just leave. This is what Hosea did. He started this thing I'm going to encourage you to do for your children. He started praying what is called a hedge of protection around her. He prayed a hedge of protection around her. In this case, he was praying that anytime that she went the wrong way, she'd run into this hedge. I'm going to say to you that that is a great principle to implement in so many different areas, and I want you to implement it in your blended family. And praying a hedge of protection in this scenario is this. So you have an ex in a household that is a bad influence. You have morals and you have boundaries, and you want to have that right influence, but they're going to go over there and they're going to spend 50% of the time or part of the time in that household. So what do? You start praying this prayer. Lord, as my child goes to their mom's house or to their dad's house, I pray that you put a hedge of protection around them and protect them from the influence that they should not have in their life. Lord, put this protection around them so that it doesn't sway them to go in a wrong direction because they have this influence. So start praying this hedge of protection. I'm going to tell you, praying is a big thing and praying is a powerful thing. And so learn how to begin to pray this hedge of protection around them. And then here's maybe the question I get so often, maybe most of all. How do you discuss with your child that their dad or their mom is a bad influence and you do not want them going down that same path? How do you have that conversation? I saved this one for last because it's the question I get the most. How do you have that conversation with your child? Well, this is a touchy one, but I don't want to dodge it. I want to talk about it just for a minute. So let me first of all say that if they have a parent that's really a bad influence, then that's not an opportunity for you to make them look bad. Let's start there. It's not an opportunity for you to make them look bad. Sometimes you that because you're frustrated at what they're doing in that household, but I'm going to ask you to check your motives. That's not what this is about. But there are times you have to contradict their behavior. There are times that the ex-spouse behavior for your children is so corrupt that you have to have a conversation with your kids and contradict that behavior. But I'm going to ask you to do it in such a way that's not toxic. Here's the toxic way to do it. Son, your daddy is crazy. That's not the way to do it. How about this way? Honey, your mom is a liar. That's not the way to do it. You may feel that way, but that's not what you say to your kids because that's toxic. You frame it in a way so that your children can continue to have compassion towards their biological parent. Do you know, I don't care how bad the influence of their other parent is, they still love them. They still love them. They can be disappointed in their behavior. They could disagree with it. They could see that it's not right, but they still love them. So you have to be careful how you have this conversation. So how do you have the conversation? I'll give you a scenario. Your child comes home, they're upset. And let's just say they went to their dad's house. And they come home and they say to you, Daddy got so mad. He lost his temper. He yelled. He threw things. He used language that you don't allow me to use. And they're upset and they tell you what happened over there. How do you have this conversation? You're gonna say this. You're gonna say, honey, you know we don't agree with your dad losing his temper like you just told me and saying hurtful things. So let's just pray for your dad that he will learn to control his temper. Make it as easy as that. You don't have to personally attack their dad. You don't have to do anything toxic. You can just simply say what he's doing, we don't agree with, and let's pray for him that he will get that under control. Just as easy as that. So you're saving some relationships when you do it this way. And you're also helping your child that you recognize they're hurt over what happened, but you're dealing with it in a way that's not toxic. So I understand the battle of having someone else in your child's life that's providing a bad influence, and you can't do anything about that. But I hope that in these few minutes, you've found some ways to deal with that bad influence by creating an atmosphere of positivity and encouragement and building self-esteem and creating rituals and creating a foundation. And I want you with me to see this as one of the greatest opportunities, challenges, but opportunities in your life to make a difference so that when your children and your stepchildren are grown, and this is one of my greatest motivators, when your stepchildren are grown, they're going to look back and they're going to say, as much as anything, I am thankful for my step-parent, for what they did for me, what they provided in my life. So thanks for joining. We'll catch you next time at Faith Influencer.